They weren't supposed to turn on him. Not like this. Not in public. Not with the cameras rolling and the microphones still hot. At 9:42 p.m., just 12 minutes after the segment aired, Senator Daniel Cross's phone began to vibrate nonstop. At first he thought it was the usual post-show chatter. Supporters, staff, maybe a few critics. That was normal. He had built his career on saying what others in his party were too careful to say. He was blunt, direct, relentless. But this wasn't normal. By 9:45, his chief of staff was calling. By 9:47, 3 senior party donors had texted. By 9:49, a senior strategist from the National Committee left a voicemail with only 4 words, "What were you thinking, Dan?" And by 9:52, the hashtag crossout was trending nationwide. The clip had already been cut, reposted, and amplified across every platform. Millions of views in minutes. The moment replayed again and again, Senator Daniel Cross sitting under the studio lights, jaw tight, eyes steady, and saying what no one in his own party wanted him to say. "We've lost our backbone," he had said. "We care more about headlines than the American people. And if that makes some people in this party uncomfortable, maybe they should be uncomfortable." The anchor had frozen. The panel had shifted awkwardly. The silence after that sentence felt like it lasted forever. Cross knew, even as the words left his mouth, that he had crossed a line. But he also believed it was the truth. What he didn't know was how fast the machine would move against him. At 10:03 p.m., the first official statement came from a senior party leader: "Senator Cross does not reflect the values or strategy of our caucus." It was carefully worded, cold, surgical. At 10:15 p.m., a major donor publicly withdrew financial support. At 10:22 p.m., a popular media personality from his own side went live and said, "Daniel Cross just handed ammunition to our opponents. This is reckless." And at 10:31 p.m., Cross received a text from someone he had considered a friend for nearly 15 years, "You need to apologize tonight." He stared at the message without responding. In his Washington townhouse, the television glowed silently as clips replayed over and over. Commentators dissected his tone, his body language, his phrasing. Words like disloyal, dangerous, and self-serving were thrown around with ease. Upstairs, his wife Emily watched the coverage with growing concern. She had seen political storms before. She had stood beside him through ugly campaigns and brutal attack ads. But this felt different. This wasn't coming from the other side. This was coming from within. Daniel leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment. He hadn't planned to ignite a civil war inside his own party. He had planned to send a warning. A wake-up call. A reminder that voters were frustrated, tired of scripted talking points and safe half-answers. He thought he was protecting the party from itself. Instead, he had just become its target. At 11:02 p.m., his chief of staff, Marcus Hill, arrived unannounced. Marcus didn't bother with small talk. He walked straight into the living room, loosened his tie, and said quietly, "They're furious." "How furious?" Daniel asked. Marcus gave him a look. "Primary challenge furious." The words hung heavy in the air. Daniel had won his last election by a comfortable margin. He had strong grassroots support. But primaries weren't about the general electorate. They were about the base. And the base listened closely to party leadership. "If you apologize tonight," Marcus continued, "we can contain it. They're drafting a statement for you. It's already written." Daniel's jaw tightened. "They wrote my apology before asking if I was sorry." Marcus didn't answer. That silence was answer enough. The draft statement arrived via email moments later. It was polite, polished, predictable. "I regret that my comments were interpreted in a way that may have caused division." Daniel stopped reading halfway through. "I won't say this," he said. Marcus rubbed his forehead. "Dan, this isn't about pride. It's about survival." But Daniel wasn't thinking about survival. He was thinking about the voters in Ohio who had packed town halls and told him they felt ignored. He was thinking about factory workers who believed both parties had stopped listening. He was thinking about promises made behind closed doors and compromises that quietly benefited lobbyists more than families. For years, he had played the game carefully. Strategic, loyal, controlled. Tonight, he had finally said what he actually believed. And now the machine wanted to crush him for it. At midnight, another call came. This one from Senator Harold Whitman, the party's unofficial enforcer in the upper chamber. "Dan," Whitman's voice was smooth, almost fatherly. "You put us in a tough spot." "I told the truth," Daniel replied. Whitman chuckled softly. "Truth is negotiable in politics. Timing is not." You embarrassed leadership on national television. That wasn't my intention. Intent doesn't matter. Impact does. There it was. The unspoken rule of Washington. Whitman continued, his tone shifting slightly colder. You have two options. Issue the apology and we move forward. Or refuse, and understand that we won't be able to protect you from what comes next. The line went quiet. Daniel understood exactly what that meant. Committee assignments could disappear. Funding pipelines could dry up. Allies could vanish overnight. And yes, a primary challenger with deep pockets could suddenly emerge. You're asking me to lie, Daniel said. I'm asking you to be a team player. The call ended without resolution. Upstairs, Emily stepped into the doorway. They want you to bend. Daniel looked up at her. If I bend now, I'll never stand straight again. She didn't argue. She knew him too well. By morning, the situation had escalated. News outlets reported that internal party meetings were being scheduled to address concerns about Senator Cross's remarks. Anonymous sources described leadership as beyond frustrated. Beyond frustrated. That phrase circulated everywhere. By noon, a conservative super PAC announced it was exploring options in Ohio. By 2 p.m., a rising young congressman, Ethan Cole, gave an interview subtly criticizing Cross's comments and emphasizing the importance of unity. Daniel recognized the move immediately. Ethan wasn't just defending the party. He was positioning himself. The machine had found its replacement. Late that afternoon, Marcus returned with fresh polling data. Overnight surveys showed something surprising. Among party insiders, Daniel's favorability had dropped sharply. Among voters, it had spiked. Especially among independents. Especially among working-class voters. Especially among people who had felt politically homeless. Marcus stared at the numbers in disbelief. They're attacking you, and the voters are responding. Daniel felt something shift in his chest. For the first time since the segment aired, he allowed himself a small breath of hope. But hope in Washington was dangerous. Because as the day went on, darker whispers began to surface. An opposition research file, long dormant, was reportedly being reviewed. Old business deals, past campaign donors, a land purchase from 12 years ago. Nothing illegal. But in politics, perception was often more powerful than fact. That evening, Daniel received a final message from Whitman. Last chance. 8 p.m. Statement. After that, we move accordingly. Daniel stood in his office, staring out at the Capitol dome glowing against the night sky. For years, he had believed he could reform the system from within. That loyalty and honesty could coexist. That speaking hard truths wouldn't cost everything. Now he understood the reality. The party wasn't just frustrated. The party was preparing for war. At 7:58 p.m., cameras assembled outside his townhouse. Reporters waited, phones ready. Inside, Marcus paced. Emily watched silently. Daniel adjusted his tie, stepped toward the podium they had set up in the living room, and looked into the lens of a single camera streaming live to millions. The draft apology sat untouched on the table behind him. He could still read it. He could still choose safety. Instead, he leaned toward the microphone and began to speak. And the moment he opened his mouth, the future of his career, and possibly his party, changed forever. The moment Daniel Cross began to speak, the political world leaned in. I've been asked to clarify my comments from last night, he said, his voice steady, eyes locked on the lens. So let me be absolutely clear. Marcus stopped pacing. Emily held her breath. I will not apologize for telling the truth. Within seconds, notifications exploded across every platform. Daniel continued, unwavering. Our party is strongest when it listens to the American people, not when it silences internal debate. If standing up for working families and demanding accountability makes some leaders uncomfortable, then maybe it's time for discomfort. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't attack anyone by name. But the message was unmistakable. This isn't about loyalty to a party, he said. It's about loyalty to the country. And just like that, the line was drawn. By 8:03 p.m., the clip was already circulating. By 8:07, cable networks cut into programming to air the speech live. By 8:12, senior leadership aides were flooding private group chats with 3 words, he chose war. At 8:15 p.m., Senator Harold Whitman turned off his television slowly. Across town, in a closed-door meeting room at the National Committee headquarters, a small group of strategists sat around a polished wooden table. The atmosphere was controlled but electric. He's doubling down, one strategist said. He thinks this makes him a populist hero, another replied. Whitman folded his hands calmly. It makes him a liability. A younger operative spoke carefully. With respect, sir, early data suggests voters are responding positively. Whitman's gaze hardened. Voters respond emotionally. Donors respond financially. And campaigns run on money. The decision was made before the meeting ended. Funding channels would tighten. Media allies would shift tone. A primary challenger would move from consideration to activation. And the research file, that would no longer sit dormant. Back in Ohio, the response felt different. At a steel plant outside Dayton, workers gathered around a break room television replaying Daniel's speech. Some nodded. Some smirked in approval. He's got guts, one man said. He'll get crushed, another replied. But even the skeptic couldn't hide a flicker of respect. By midnight, Daniel's campaign website had received a surge of small dollar donations unlike anything they had seen outside of an election year. $20, $50, $100, thousands of them. Marcus stared at the dashboard in disbelief. This is grassroots energy we haven't seen before. Daniel leaned back in his chair. They're proving my point. But even as momentum built publicly, the counterattack began quietly. The next morning, a well-known political columnist published an op-ed titled, Daniel Cross Risks Splitting the Party at a Critical Moment. It questioned his motives, suggested ambition, implied recklessness. By noon, 3 more similar articles appeared. By evening, a cable news panel debated whether Cross was self-sabotaging for attention. The narrative was forming. Not courageous, not principled, selfish, dangerous, ambitious. Marcus walked into Daniel's office with a tablet in hand. They're framing this as a leadership grab. Daniel looked up sharply. That's absurd. Doesn't matter, Marcus said quietly. It's effective. Across the country, Congressman Ethan Cole officially announced a listening tour across Ohio. His statement was subtle but pointed. Our party must remain united and focused, Cole said. Personal grievances cannot distract from the mission. Personal grievances. Daniel watched the clip twice. That was coordinated, he muttered. Marcus didn't disagree. By the third day, the pressure intensified. 2 longtime colleagues stopped returning his calls. A committee vote he had championed was suddenly postponed. An influential donor canceled a scheduled meeting. The message was clear: isolation. Whitman called again that evening. You've made your point, Whitman said calmly. Now let's talk about how this ends. I'm not ending it, Daniel replied. Whitman's tone cooled. You misunderstand. This will end. The only question is whether you end it on your feet or on your back. Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. If the party punishes honesty, that's their decision. No, Whitman corrected. It will be yours. The call ended abruptly. That night, a new development surfaced. An online political outlet published an investigative piece highlighting a real estate investment Daniel had made 15 years earlier with a developer who was now under federal scrutiny for unrelated financial misconduct. There was no evidence Daniel had done anything improper. But the headline didn't emphasize that. Cross-linked to controversial developer. The word linked was enough. By morning, the story spread. Cable panels dissected it. Social media amplified it. Opponents demanded transparency. Marcus stormed into Daniel's office. This is the research file. They've started releasing pieces. Daniel skimmed the article, anger rising. This is weak. It doesn't need to be strong, Marcus replied. It needs to create doubt. Emily joined them moments later, her expression tense. Our daughter was asked about it at school. The room went quiet. Politics was one thing. Family was another. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself. I knew this wouldn't stay clean, he said softly. The following evening, polling shifted slightly. While grassroots support remained high, party-affiliated voters began expressing concerns. Concerns. A word carefully seated. Meanwhile, Ethan Cole's listening tour drew increasing media coverage. Crowds appeared enthusiastic. Headlines described him as measured and unifying. A narrative contrast was forming. Firebrand versus stability. Risk versus unity. Disruption versus discipline. Marcus laid out the reality bluntly. If Cole announces a primary run, leadership will back him quietly but fully. Daniel nodded. He had expected that. What he hadn't expected was the call that came next. It wasn't from Whitman. It wasn't from a strategist. It wasn't from an opponent. It was from Governor Alicia Ramirez of Texas, one of the most popular figures in the party nationally. Daniel, she said directly, I watched your speech. Daniel braced himself. You're not wrong, she continued. Silence filled his office. But you're playing this dangerously, she added. If you're going to challenge the direction of the party, you need more than moral clarity. You need infrastructure. I'm not staging a rebellion, Daniel replied. Ramirez exhaled softly. Maybe you should be. The words lingered. Daniel stared out his office window again, Capitol lights reflecting in the glass. A rebellion. He had only intended to push for accountability. Now he was being forced into a choice far larger than a single speech. Fight quietly and survive, or fight openly, and risk everything. That night, internal polling numbers leaked to the press showing Daniel leading Ethan Cole in a hypothetical primary matchup among general voters, but trailing among high-propensity party activists. The divide was stark. The base was splitting. The establishment was mobilizing. And the donors were watching carefully. Marcus looked at Daniel with a mix of concern and resolve. If you take this further, there's no halfway. They will come at you with everything. Daniel nodded slowly. For the first time, he realized something critical. This was no longer about one comment on television. This was about the future direction of the party itself. And whether someone inside it could challenge the machine and survive. At 11:47 p.m., Daniel drafted a message to his core campaign team. Emergency strategy meeting. 7 a.m. We decide the path forward. He hit send. Outside, the political world buzzed with speculation. Inside, Daniel Cross understood the truth clearly now. The party wasn't just fuming. It was preparing to make an example out of him. And in less than 8 hours, he would have to decide whether to retreat, or escalate. At 7 a.m. sharp, the conference room inside Daniel Cross's Ohio campaign headquarters was packed. Not with the usual staffers juggling polling charts and fundraising spreadsheets. This was different. This was survival. Marcus stood at the front of the room, remote in hand, a large digital screen glowing behind him. Emily sat quietly near the back, arms folded, listening. Senior advisors, communications directors, field organizers, and 2 outside strategists filled every seat. Daniel entered without ceremony. We're past damage control, he began. So let's stop pretending this is a messaging problem. This is a power fight. No one disagreed. Marcus clicked to the first slide. Polling numbers flashed across the screen. General electorate approval, up 8 points. Independent support, up 14 points. Small dollar donations, tripled in 72 hours. High dollar donor retention, down 40%. Party activist approval, down 18 points. It's a split, Marcus said. Voters are leaning in. Infrastructure is pulling away. Daniel nodded. And Ethan. The next slide appeared. Ethan Cole, favorability among party leadership, strong. Media tone, positive, stabilizing, unifying. Primary viability, increasing. He hasn't announced, Marcus said, but he's building a shadow campaign. A silence settled over the room. One strategist finally spoke. You have 2 viable options. Daniel gestured for him to continue. Option 1. Soften. Not apologize. But pivot. Emphasize unity. Clarify tone. Slow the bleed inside the party. And option 2. Daniel asked. Lean in. Go national. Frame this as a movement, not a moment. Build grassroots infrastructure fast enough that leadership can't suffocate it. Emily's eyes lifted slightly. The room waited. Daniel exhaled slowly. If we pivot now, we look weak. That's politics, someone muttered. No, Daniel replied firmly. That's surrender. Marcus stepped forward carefully. If we escalate, they'll escalate harder. The research file won't trickle out anymore. It'll flood. Daniel met his gaze. Is there anything in it that's illegal? No. Unethical? No. Embarrassing? Marcus hesitated. Depends on how creative they get. A faint ripple of tension moved through the room. Daniel leaned against the table. They think this is about ego, he said. They think I want leadership. I don't. I want reform. One of the younger field organizers spoke up nervously. With respect, sir, reform requires leverage. The truth of that landed heavily. Leverage. Daniel straightened. Then we build it. The decision was made. By 9:30 a.m., the campaign issued a new announcement. Senator Daniel Cross would embark on a nationwide, American Accountability Tour, beginning in Ohio and expanding to key battleground states. The language was deliberate. Not anti-party. Not rebellious. Accountability. Within hours, cable networks picked up the story. Cross doubles down. Is this the start of a civil war? Populist uprising or political suicide? Ethan Cole responded quickly with a statement of his own. While some choose confrontation, I choose collaboration. The contrast sharpened further. That afternoon, the flood began. A major news outlet published documents highlighting an old lobbying firm that had once donated to Daniel's campaign, a donation that had been publicly disclosed and legal. Another article questioned a consulting contract from his first Senate run. Again, nothing illegal. But the tone was clear. The implication louder than the facts. By evening, social media bots amplified every headline. Linked. Connected. Questionable. Investigate. Marcus slammed his tablet down on the table. They're coordinating releases every 6 hours. It's systematic. Daniel remained calm, though his jaw was tight. They want to exhaust us. They want to bury you, Marcus corrected. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening on the ground. The first stop of the accountability tour was a modest town hall in Toledo. The campaign had anticipated a manageable crowd. Instead, the venue overflowed. People lined the streets. Some held homemade signs. Speak the truth. Country over party. Don't back down. Daniel stepped onto the small stage to thunderous applause. For a brief moment, the noise drowned out everything else, the headlines, the attacks, the whispers. He gripped the microphone. They say I've created division, he began. But division already exists when people feel unheard. The crowd erupted again. He didn't attack leadership directly. He didn't mention Whitman or Cole. Instead, he talked about factory closures, inflation, border policy confusion, veterans waiting months for care, parents frustrated with education debates. He framed it not as betrayal, but as accountability. And it worked. Clips from Toledo went viral. Cable hosts who had criticized him now admitted, reluctantly, that there's real energy there. By the third stop on the tour, national commentators began using a new phrase. Cross movement. That phrase set off alarms in Washington. Back in the Capitol, Whitman convened another private meeting. He's turning this into something larger, one strategist warned. Whitman's expression remained composed, but colder than before. Then we make it about character. Within 24 hours, a former staffer from Daniel's early Senate years appeared on a podcast, alleging that Cross had a temper behind closed doors. Anonymous sources confirmed he was difficult. No accusations of misconduct, just character erosion. Marcus watched the podcast clip with disgust. This is textbook. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at his phone. A new notification had just appeared. Breaking. Congressman Ethan Cole files exploratory committee for U.S. Senate, Ohio. It had begun. The primary challenge was no longer hypothetical. Emily found Daniel alone later that night in a quiet corner of the campaign office. You knew this was coming, she said gently. I hoped it wouldn't, he replied. She stepped closer. Are you prepared for what happens if you lose? The question lingered in the air. Daniel had always believed he would retire on his own terms one day. Finish strong. Pass the torch. Not be pushed out. Not be dismantled piece by piece. I'm prepared to fight, he said. That wasn't my question. He looked at her then, really looked at her. No, he admitted quietly. I'm not prepared to lose everything. She nodded. Then don't fight like you're protecting a seat. Fight like you're protecting something bigger. The words stayed with him. The next week intensified beyond anything the campaign had imagined. Ethan Cole officially announced his candidacy. Leadership figures appeared at his side. Major donors shifted allegiance publicly. Media coverage described the race as a battle for the soul of the party. Polling tightened among party activists. The attacks grew sharper. And then came the leak that changed everything. Late one Friday evening, an investigative journalist released documents suggesting that Daniel had once privately criticized a prominent party leader during a closed-door strategy meeting years earlier, comments recorded without his knowledge. The quote was blunt, frustrated, unfiltered. It painted him not just as reform-minded, but openly resentful. Within minutes, Whitman released a statement. Disagreements are natural, but disrespect undermines unity. Cable news exploded. Was Cross secretly hostile all along? Was this personal? Was this ambition disguised as principle? Marcus rushed into Daniel's hotel room as they prepared for the next rally. This is worse than the other leaks, he said. It feeds motive. Daniel read the transcript slowly. He didn't deny saying it. He remembered the meeting clearly, the frustration, the closed-door candor. But it had never been meant for public consumption. He looked up at Marcus. They're not just trying to defeat me, he said quietly. They're trying to define me. Outside, a crowd had already begun gathering for the rally. Inside, the campaign war room buzzed with panic. Should they deny, clarify, attack back? Daniel stood, adjusting his jacket. No, he said firmly. We don't chase every leak. We go forward. Marcus stared at him. Forward where? Daniel's eyes hardened with resolve. Tonight, he said, we stop defending. He picked up his phone and began typing a message to his communications team. Prepare a major address. National broadcast. Prime time. 3 days. Marcus felt the weight of it immediately. This will escalate everything, he warned. Daniel nodded slowly. It already has. Outside, the chants were growing louder. Inside, the line between reform and rebellion had all but disappeared. And in 3 days, under national lights, Daniel Cross was about to make a choice that would either cement his movement, or shatter it completely. The announcement of a primetime national address hit Washington like a thunderclap. Not a rally, not a town hall, not another defensive statement. A national address. Live, unfiltered. For 3 days, speculation consumed every political newsroom in the country. Was Daniel Cross launching a presidential bid? Was he declaring independence from the party? Was he about to expose internal leadership secrets? Inside his campaign headquarters, the energy was tense but focused. This was no longer reactive politics. This was strategic confrontation. Marcus stood over a conference table covered in draft outlines. "We need discipline," he said. "If this turns into a personal attack, we lose credibility." Daniel nodded. "It won't be personal, but it will be direct." Marcus asked. Daniel didn't hesitate. "It has to be." Across town in Washington, Senator Harold Whitman convened yet another closed-door meeting. "He's gambling," one strategist said. "No," Whitman replied calmly. "He's calculating. Should we preempt?" Another asked. "Release more." Whitman shook his head slowly. "No, let him speak. If he overreaches, he collapses on his own." But behind the calm exterior, Whitman understood the risk. If Cross successfully framed this as reform instead of rebellion, it could reshape the party's internal balance of power. And that couldn't be allowed. Meanwhile, Ethan Cole intensified his own messaging. He began appearing on major Sunday shows, emphasizing steady leadership and forward-looking unity. He never attacked Daniel by name, but the contrast was constant. Measured, calm, disciplined. Privately, however, Cole's campaign accelerated opposition research advertising in digital spaces. Targeted ads questioning Daniel's temperament began appearing in activist circles. The battlefield had widened. On the night of the address, Daniel stood alone backstage in a modest studio in Columbus. The setting was intentionally simple: American flag behind him, neutral backdrop, no cheering crowd. This was not a rally speech. This was a line in the sand. Marcus approached quietly. "Once you start, there's no adjusting midstream. This will define you." Daniel exhaled slowly. "I know." Emily stepped forward and adjusted his tie. "Speak like you did in Toledo." "Not angry." "Certain." He nodded. The countdown began. 5, 4, 3. The red light blinked on. Daniel stepped forward. "My fellow Americans," he began, steady and composed. "This week, you've heard a lot about me." Across the country, millions watched. Cable networks carried it live. Social media streams surged. Even those who disliked him tuned in. "They say I've divided my party," Daniel continued. "But let me ask you something. When did asking hard questions become betrayal?" He paused, not for drama, but for clarity. For years, both parties have promised reform, promised transparency, promised to listen. And for years, too often, those promises have faded behind closed doors. In Washington, Whitman watched in silence. Daniel continued, carefully measured. "I'm not leaving my party. I'm not launching a new